Cheri, whenever you are ready,
Okay,
go for it.
so today we're going to just talk briefly about Transition 101, and this is post-secondary transition. So we're talking about children or students who are ages, in Maryland it's 14 to 21. Through IDEA it's 16, it starts at age 16, we start talking about transition, but in Maryland we start talking about transition when a child turns 14. So we're really talking about 14 to 21-year-olds. So this is what IDEA says how they define transition. It's designed to be within a results-oriented process that is focused on improving the academic and functional achievement of the child with a disability, to facilitate the child's movement from school to post-secondary activities. They further define it as it's a results-oriented process. It's focused on improving the academic and functional achievement of a child with a disability. We talk about continuing into adult education, integrated employment, vocational education, post-secondary education. It's definitely based on a child's individual needs. We're going to take into account their strengths, their preferences, and their interests. And it's really important that we remember that we need to involve the child in this, because many, many times I find that people just assume about our children, what they like, what they don't like. But it's really important that we talk to our children, even children that struggle with language, that we come up with ways to be able to find out what it is that they like, what they don't like, and what their preferences are. So again, transition services in Maryland start at age 14, and according to IDEA, the ages start at age 16. So in Maryland at age 14, a child is definitely going to be invited to their IEP meeting to start talking about transition. They're going to start talking about what does that mean and what are we asking of them. So what does it mean when we invite a child to their IEP meeting, and how do we explain transition to them? So transition itself is meant to help students progress into the world of adulthood. There's many aspects of adulthood. It's education and work, but it's also the ability to be able to live as independently as possible and to participate in the community. Transitioning planning and services really address each aspect of this adulthood. We talk about transition planning and services. It's part of the child's IEP. So that's going to be included in a child's IEP. And when a child gets to age 14, it's really that transition plan that should be guiding the IEP goals. So based on what their transition is going to look like, our goals should be written based on that transition plan. And also, according to the law, transition planning is a coordinated set of activities. So the IEP team is going to work collaboratively with the other service providers that are available, and they're going to work together to plan and implement the parts of that IEP and that transition plan. Young adults are entitled to transition planning and services. Through the school year, they turn age 21, and that is part of their free and appropriate public education. It's also very important for our families to understand the difference between entitlement and eligibility as we talk about transition. Students are entitled to a free and appropriate public education. They're entitled to that. The difference is when a child leaves high school or leaves school, then they need to be eligible for those adult services. And many families don't quite understand the difference. That when a family applies for services for transition, whether it be a group home, whether it be a day program, they have to be eligible for those services. And those programs can turn them down. There can be a waiting list for those services. And many times families don't realize this, and transition planning is put off until 6 months before a child is going to leave school, sometimes the month before a child is going to leave school, and then we run into many, many problems. So it's very important that families understand the difference between entitlement and eligibility and what that difference really means. So there's many adult service agencies that are available to help our students. The Maryland Developmental Disabilities Administration is available. They're going to offer services that help the students and their families navigate or have a successful life, to be independent in life. They're really focused on things such as housing, work programs, day programs, different things like that. Families also need to realize that just because a child has a developmental disability does not mean they're automatically eligible for those services. Through the DDA, or the Developmental Disabilities Administration, the family does need to apply for these services. A family would want to apply for these services prior to leaving school at age 21. If they wait until after they leave school, then there's a good chance they're going to be added to a waiting list. The Governor's Transitioning Youth Initiative actually earmarks funds in the DDA budget that is specifically for eligible students who apply for DDA when they're leaving school. And that way they don't end up on that waiting list. But if you miss that window, then you're back to be part of that waiting list. The Division of Rehabilitative Services, DOORS, in Maryland, it's about employment. It's really all about employment. So if you're interested in work, then DOORS is the agency that's going to help you. Again, you definitely want to make sure you apply for DOORS services. They also have a pre-employment transition service called PREETS. And with PREETS, you can apply as early as a freshman year of high school. And you're going to apply for PREETS services prior to applying for straight DOORS services. So the PREETS gives a student that opportunity to experience work prior to leaving school. However, once a child, if you apply for the PREETS services, you also want to make sure about 2 years before you leave high school, you apply for those DOORS services. So there are two different services and two different applications that you're going to fill out. So some of the services that DOORS can provide, they can talk about career guidance and counseling to try to help you find your job goal or the career path that you're interested in. They help with job search and placement assistance to help you find that job that you want. They can provide support and customized employment services. So if you find that job, maybe you need a job coach to work with you for a short time or for a time during that job, and they can help with that. And they also are able to provide vocational and post-secondary training and education. They also can help you with transportation planning. So they can help if a child has the ability to drive. They can help the child get a driver's license. They have classes that are available. They have independent, I know for my son, he took the driving class there, and then also was able to have some one-on-one help for him to be able to get his driver's license and his learner's permit. The Behavioral Health Administration, or BHA, is similar to DDA. It's a separate pot of money, but it really focuses on helping students who have mental health diagnosis. And then lastly, we have the Workforce Development offices, and they offer various education, training, employment, and regulatory services to connect businesses with the workforce. So these services help provide both the employers and the employees the opportunity to find that job, to improve their performance, and to thrive in that workforce. So post-secondary can look very different for every child. It's not going to be the same from one person to the next. Some children will look for students, I shouldn't say children. Some students are going to look for employment. They're going to be going straight to that job world. Some will go to the university or to a college. It could be a community college. It could be a four-year university. It could be a technical or vocational training. There's also just interactions within the community for students that maybe aren't able to work. Maybe they're not planning to go to college or a vocational training, but they can do some volunteer work within the community. And a lot of times we've found that with some students that maybe aren't going to college, maybe they're not able to have a job, but we have to kind of look outside of the box and look at what some of our students can do and what are their interests. So it might be they go to a gym and they hand out the towels at the gym. It could be filling the salt and pepper shakers in a cafeteria. So we really need to kind of look out of the box and look at what is appropriate for all of our students. So we talk about a transition timeline, and what does that timeline mean? And it's very important for families to follow that timeline. So at age 14, our students start to participate in those IEP meetings. And it's important for the student to understand why they're participating in that IEP. Are they there just to sit and listen? No. We want them to actually participate. We want them to understand that we're talking about their future. We want them to ask questions. We want to ask them questions, and we want them to be able to answer. At age 14, they may not be able to answer those questions. I mean, how many of us really knew what we wanted to do when we were 14 and in high school? We probably didn't. I know I still don't know exactly what I want to do. But it's important that we just start talking to our students about what does that future mean? And what are you thinking? What do you like to do? What do you enjoy doing? We're going to start to identify necessary education and training goals to reach those post-secondary goals. So if a child says, I really like animals, and we talk about maybe working in a veterinarian's office, then we need to start talking about what are the education goals, what are the training goals to work in a veterinarian office. If you want to be a veterinarian, you need to go to vet school. You need to go to college. If you want to be a vet tech, maybe the guidelines are a little different for that. If you want to be the receptionist in a veterinarian's office, then again, it's different goals that you would write for each of these different jobs and training. At age 14, a family's going to start to think about contacting DDA and to start those applications. Contact doors and start that application for pre-ed services. So at age 16, believe it or not, we need children that aren't necessarily going to get their driver's license to obtain a photo identification card, so they have an ID card. Some children will start getting their driver's license at age 16, some may not. And if they're not, that photo identification card is very helpful to have, especially if you travel, then they have that ID card. Can apply for reduced fare cards with public transportation. Now's the time to start thinking about that. If a student needs paratransit services, now's the time to start applying for those services and to start using those services so that a student starts to understand how to use those. At age 17, you're going to really start talking about that medical coverage. Talk to your child's pediatrician and find out how long will that pediatrician be able to see your child. Some pediatricians are able to see a child up until 18, and some may say till 21. So it's going to depend. That adult world of medical services is very different than a younger child's world from those medical services that are available. It might be time to if your pediatrician says age 18 is my limit, then it's time to start thinking about who would be your child's adult doctor. And talk to your child about that so that they know these changes are coming. At age 18 is age of majority for our children. They need to register to vote. That's a right that they have, and we want them to vote. We want them to understand. It may be that they only vote for, maybe it's the governor, maybe it's the president. It doesn't necessarily have to be for each person that's on that ballot. You know, those ballots can be very long and intimidating. But talk to your child about, we have an election coming up. If your child's going to be 18, talk to them about voting. Do they want to vote for the president? Do they want to vote for a governor? Are they interested in that? Do they understand the difference of who's running for what people stand for? But that's a right that our children have, that we don't want to take that away from them. In some states, parents may no longer have access to a child's medical information when they turn 18. So you may need to get that medical waiver so that you do still continue to have that access to that information. If your child's not already receiving Social Security, at age 18, your child can apply for Social Security services or Social Security income. And that's based on the individual child, not on your family at that point. Many students don't don't qualify for those services until they reach age 18 because of the qualifications for Social Security income. But that's a right, again, that a child with a disability has that right to be able to apply for those services for that income. Between the ages of 17 to 20, we want to make sure that those DDA applications are updated. If we haven't started to receive those services yet, then we want to make sure that DDA is aware that our child is coming up to that graduation time, and to make sure all their information is updated, and they know that they're there. It's time to start to think about visiting service providers. You want to make sure you're visiting service providers by the October of the graduation or their exit year. These things take time. We talked about entitlement and eligibility. You may go visit 2 or 3 different service providers and think, oh, this one is great, this is the one we want, and maybe your child's not eligible for services from that provider. So it's important that you visit all different providers, check out all the different services that are available, and you may need to apply to more than one service provider to find the right fit for your child for services that would be available. So then we talk about the IEP or the transition meeting itself. So in that transition meeting, we're going to talk with your child, and we want to know, what does your child like to do? And you're going to ask your child these questions. I know for my son, we went to his transition meeting, and he said he likes to wrestle. And I was sat there, and I was kind of taken aback a little bit because my son had never, ever wrestled in his life. And I was like, he likes to wrestle. Where did that come from? Well, there was some major miscommunication going on. But no, he did not like to wrestle. But we need to find out, what does your child like to do? You need to talk to your child about what will your child do the day after they leave high school? Does your child realize that school bus isn't going to come anymore? That if they're in a program where they are in a dorm situation, some of our schools for the deaf, they have the dorm situations that a child would stay in the dorm, schools for the blind. Do they realize that once they leave high school, that those services no longer exist? That they're not going to get on that school bus, they're not going to pack their bag. And talk about, what are they going to do when that school bus stops coming? Are you aware of the services that are available after high school? Do you know about the day programs that may or may not be available? Do you know what the criteria is, the eligibility criteria for those services? Are you aware of any other services? Have you talked to any of the other parents of children that are similar to yours to see what services their children are receiving or what they're looking for? And your school can also help you with that, to help find those services that might be available for your child. And also, is there a local support agency that can help you? Again, talk to your child's school. We talk about doors. We talk about DDA. They can all help you with these kind of questions. It's also important that you attend the transition and the IEP meetings prepared. We want your child to be at that meeting. We want your child to participate in that meeting. It's even more essential when the topic is transition that your child is at that meeting. And attending that IEP, when your child attends that IEP, can also help to kind of build your child's self-advocacy skills and make real what can also many times be abstract in the mind of a young child or a young adult, and that transition to adulthood. It's interesting when you talk about a child and talk about the future. A lot of our children don't understand what the future means. I used to ask my son, where are you going to live in the future? He said, well, with mom, of course. Where else would I live? Didn't quite get that concept of, maybe one day mom and dad aren't going to be here, and then where are you going to live? So we need to talk about those things. We want you to make sure that any and all documentation that you believe might be helpful in the meeting, bring it with you. These could be your notes about your child's interests or preferences, because when you get into that meeting and you're asked, a question about your child's preferences or what they like or don't like, you may or may not remember what you were thinking about. So write these things down and make sure you bring them with you. If you have any assessment results from any assessments that have been done, any testing that's been done, talking about any kind of post-secondary employment, what your child likes to do, bring those results with you. Bring samples of your child's work that relate to his interests and talents. Bring medical records, brochures, or anything that you think that might be appropriate to help write those goals and to help talk about the future and transition. You can always bring a friend or family member with you to an IEP or transition meeting. That person can be there to take notes. That person can be there to just help jog your memory, to give you that moral support that you may just need during the meeting. And it's also important that you have a willingness to communicate. And we want you to communicate effectively with your IEP team members, because the best plans that you're going to make with your child is going to be with a team that can work together. So we have some transition do's and some transition don'ts. So 5 days before your meeting, you will or you should receive a draft IEP, and that's a law in Maryland that you will receive a draft IEP meeting or draft IEP document 5 days before your meeting. You want to make sure you review that. Make sure that when you're reviewing that, use a yellow marker, use Post-it notes, write notes on there so that when you come to that meeting, you have your questions already. And many times, a lot of our counties, you can actually ask those questions that you have prior to your meeting, and you can work out any issues before you actually get to the table. Talk with your child about what that IEP meeting and that transition meeting is going to look like. Talk with your child about what questions might be asked of them, and role play a little bit. We want you to always be willing to listen. You need to remember that every member of that IEP team or that transition team has a different viewpoint of your child. Your child may be one way at home and may be very different at school. So we want all your team members to listen, to not only to you, but for you to listen to them. It's important for you to ask questions. Wouldn't expect you to not have questions. And to ask for help. When you need help, you need clarification, you need to ask. We want everyone to communicate positively and keep that communication open at all times. And obviously to respect the other team members. We want you to be willing to brainstorm. You know, sometimes, especially when it comes to transition, we have to think out of the box. So there's no bad ideas. We just need all the ideas. So brainstorm, throw it all out there, and then let's bring it down to what it is that we need. Keep in mind, you are one of the experts about your child, and bring that expertise to the table. We want you to help your child to feel like they're supported and they are also a full member of that team. So we really want your child to be involved in that meeting as much as possible. And we want to maintain the focus in these meetings. Many times we go to IEP meetings and transition meetings and the focus gets off one way or the other. But we need to bring that focus back. And the focus is to help your child reach their greatest potential. So only 2 transition don'ts, and I think these are probably one of the most important things. Don't ever underestimate your own child's opinions, and don't underestimate your own opinions. And we want you to keep your expectations of your child very high. Sometimes we hear people tell us our children can't, they can't, and we need to make sure that we remind people that, but we can, they can. So we want to keep those expectations high. So your transition plan is going to include goals. These are going to be your annual transition goals. And those goals are going to really be based on the questions that your child answers. What do they want to do in the future? Are they looking to go to work? Are they looking to go to college? And we want those goals to fit what it is they're looking to do. They could be independent living goals. They could be social goals, but those goals to help them have a successful adult life. There's going to be data that's going to be collected. everything we do now is based on data. So we need to know, are our children meeting these goals? Are they doing well? So we're going to be collecting data to talk about that. We're going to talk about your child's needs. What does your child need? What accommodations? What do they need to be successful in life? Just general information. Lots of just general information is going to be shared. It's a coordinated effort. We talked about that before. You're going to talk about vocational activities. Is there a program? There's a workforce and technology center through doors. Is that an appropriate program for your child to go? To look at the different programs that are available there. You're really going to look at all area of your child's life when we're talking about transition. We're going to talk about community. We're going to talk about religious life. We're going to talk about their everything. You know, what do they like to do? What do they not like to do? Will they live at home? Will they live alone? Will they live in a group home? Will they live just with supports? Those are all things we're going to need to talk about. And we're going to bring all those pieces together to make sure that your child can be successful. So what is going to be in your child's transition file? It's really important to keep everything organized, to keep an up-to-date transition planning file for your child. You can keep all kinds of documents in this file. And these documents are going to be very important at your child's IEP meetings. It could also be important when you're talking to potential employers, when your child's going for an interview, or when you're talking to service providers. So depending on the age of your child, you may or may not have some of these things, but some of the things that you're going to want to keep are going to be obviously your child's IEPs. We want to keep IEPs forever. We don't want to ever throw an IEP away until your child has left school, and then after that you can celebrate with maybe a burning party later. But up until while your child is still in school, you want to keep all their IEPs, because sometimes you need to go back and do some comparisons to see what that progress is being made in that IEP. It's important to keep recent psychological or medical evaluations that are done. You'll need these for some of the services that you apply for at times. You could definitely would need those to apply for DDA services. Any recent education evaluations that are done, you definitely want to keep those. Any report cards or progress reports, you want to keep those in your file. It's also important to keep any awards that your child receives or any letters, anything that's positive like that. Keep those in the file. Those are important. You want to be able to show those. Those are absolutely important for your child. You want to keep some samples of your child's schoolwork. If your child does an exit document when they leave school, you want to keep those. Again, any evaluation reports or assessment data that you have, any medical records, financial information for your child. Hopefully your child will leave school with a resume together. So you want to keep that. And then if your child does have a job and they're being paid, keep your child's pay stubs so that you have those. So if your child is going to college and they're college bound, then you want to start talking at that age 14. What are the requirements for them to graduate high school? What requirements are needed to get into the college that they're thinking of? Do they need to have certain classes? Do they need to have foreign language classes? Do they need to have AP classes? What classes do they need to be able to get into that college? Do they need extracurricular activities? So you want to talk about those kind of things. What are those college requirements? Are we on target to meet those graduation requirements and those college requirements? Develop that plan and write it down. Don't just talk about it, but we want to make sure it's all in writing. It's also, when we talk about going to college, financial aid. That's huge. There's scholarships, but you have to apply. And some scholarships you apply a year before they leave school. Some could be more than that. Does your employer offer any kind of college scholarships? Some do. We talk about scholarships that can be found from civic organizations, the Elks Club, the Rotary Clubs. Many of those offer scholarships. So talk to your child's guidance counselor about scholarships that are available that they could apply for. Bank loans. Obviously, you can get a bank loan to pay for college. Federal student aid. Talk about they've got grants, there's work study, there's loans that are available. You have to fill out a form, your FAFSA form. Start working on that. Those come out, I think it's October or January, that you can start filling those FAFSA forms out. But that determines how much money and when a child can get money. And the earlier you get those forms in, the better and the more money you're able to get those forms. So it's important that you start looking at for financial aid and you start doing that early. So just a middle school checklist, believe it or not, you want to start talking to your child about what do they like in middle school? What are their interests? You want them to start to develop those good study habits. And obviously you're going to keep an eye on their grades. Make sure they're keeping those up. And that seems like a long way before we're going to college. And many children will say, oh, no, I'm fine. But it's time to just kind of start looking at those things and start talking to your child about those college needs and requirements. You know, why is it important to have good study habits in college? Because nobody's standing over you to make sure you do your homework. We want them to do those things themselves. Nobody's standing over them, making sure their grades are staying up. So we want them to have those skills. Our high school checklists, we want students to take some challenging classes in those core academic subjects. We don't take those AP classes. You know, look at the AP classes that are available. We want students to stay involved in the school or community activities. That's important with those college applications. We talked about keeping those awards. This is why you want to keep those awards. We want to make sure they're all listed on those college applications, any activities that your child does. Use the summertime wisely. That's a great time for a child to work, to volunteer, to take summer classes. Many students can take summer classes at the college. You know, we already get some of those college courses done. I know from my other son, when he left high school, he had a year of college done based on just AP classes that he took. Volunteer work. Summertime is a great time to get those volunteer hours done. Start thinking about those PSATs, the SATs, the ACTs. Get those exams ready. Start studying. Start looking at you know, what do you need to do for those. Again, apply for scholarships. Attend those college fairs. Talk to the colleges. See what's out there, and then talk to your child about what you're seeing at those college fairs, and see what are they interested in. If they don't like the cold, don't like the snow, they probably don't want to go to school in Rochester, New York. But if they love the cold, maybe they do. Maybe they love the water and they want to head down south towards Florida, someplace like that for college. Maybe a certain college has a great program about animals that they love. So really talk to them about what their interests are and what they're looking for. When we talk about employment, you know, everything is based on what your child likes to do. So when it comes to employment, what does your child like to do? Where would they think they would like to work? But keep those goals realistic. We've had children, I want to be an astronaut. Well, you have to be able to read to be an astronaut. And maybe a child doesn't have a high enough reading level. So be realistic when a child says, you know, oh, I want to be a pro basketball player, but maybe they can't dribble a basketball. So we need to be realistic when we're talking about their interests and what they can do. Maybe they can't be a pro basketball player, but maybe they could work on that basketball team in a different role. Look at different work study programs for employment. Look at the different workforce training programs that are available. You want your child to develop a resume. Look at applications. Many jobs now, you fill applications online. Are they able to do that? Can you help them do that? Look at summer jobs that are available. And look at internships programs that are available. Many companies love to have interns. They don't get paid, but it's great work experience. And there are some internship programs that are paid interns. If your child is looking more to live in a group home or looking for supportive employment, it's important to start visiting those agencies. Visit different homes that are available. And there's a lot of things that are out there, a lot of agencies that are available. But again, we talk about eligibility, and we talk about, is your child eligible for those services? Would that agency or would that home be able to accept your child based on the needs that they have? Write down any questions or concerns you may have. After you see the programs, you can email them later and ask them your questions, or have them address any concerns that you have, or if you know before, take your list with you and ask those questions. Find out about application deadlines and procedures. Sometimes those application deadlines come up very quickly. It might be October of that last year of high school that application has to be in, and maybe you don't start looking until January or February, and you've missed that application deadline for that next year, and you have to wait. And ask questions. You can't ask too many questions. So I wanted to also let you know that Connections Beyond Sight and Sound is providing a parent's guide to transition. This is going to be a 4-part series. The series is from, it's in the month of July 1st, 8th, 15th, and the 22nd. And the sessions are 7 to 9 in the evening. It is only for parents, and we're only accepting 15 families to apply for this, to join us for these sessions. And the series is really going to go in depth with transition. I mean, today we really just talked a little bit, just very briefly, just kind of reviewed. But we're going to go into depth. We're going to talk about a vision. We're going to talk about creating a vision. And we're going to have homework. You're going to create a vision, and you're going to do that with your child. We're going to talk about the steps to transition. We're going to talk a little bit more about, what do those goals really look like? What do we really need to do? How are we going to apply for different services? We're going to talk about building that resume in the world of work and volunteering, and what that really looks like for our children. What are the soft skills that are needed? How do some of our children really get a job? We talk about our kids need to go out and apply for those jobs, but we also know a lot of times it's who you know and where you go and what you see and what you say. And that's a great way to get a job, but we're really going to dive in deep with that. And then we're going to look out of the box to the future. What does the future really look like for your child and for your family? And we're going to dive into that. So these sessions are going to be very, very in-depth. We leave with homework, but it's a great series. We're excited about that. And lastly, dream big, set big goals, and you have to take action to make transitions, have transition be successful for you and your family and your child. And Jen, that's all I have to say.
All righty. We did have one question that would you be willing to share the PowerPoint?
Oh, sure.
Okay, awesome. So I can send that out to anyone that's interested that has signed in on our sign-in sheet. Does anybody have any questions? We had some comments though about how the information has been really helpful. That even schools with students with special needs and blind need this.
Absolutely.
And tragic that. I have a question.
It's
Grace. I wrote what you're reading. What happens? I'm wondering what suggestions can be provided for young adults who have already aged out and someone did drop the ball and they're stuck. So they do have case managers, and that kind of goes in circles and doesn't really get anywhere, and then you have parents that are just really either physically not well, they have their own medical conditions, or it's a single parent who just isn't able to facilitate this process. What becomes of a human life, such as a person, such as this, and what suggestions could help move this individual's life forward?
That's a really hard question, and I have to say that transition is probably the hardest part. It's the hardest thing we've done. Just the thought that we were working with our son to plan his future, and I should say my son is deaf and he has some intellectual disabilities. So we struggled. We struggled just finding programs for him, but it was very difficult. He's actually 25 now, and we do a program called self-direction. We use the self-direction waiver through DDA and have developed our own program. But it took a lot of work for my husband and I, and we worked really hard. And I know there's a lot of parents out there that don't have that ability. And it's almost like you need to find somebody that does, that's in his life or in that person's life, to help them navigate the system, because it's not easy. I mean, it's definitely not easy. It's not easy to find the programs that fit, especially when we have children that or young adults that have issues that are a little more severe, that if they have to be in a group home, and we need to find that group home that is really appropriate for them, that they're going to get the services and the language and the communication that they need. I think that would be my suggestion. Is there someone, if the parent's not able to do what needs to be done, is there another family member that would be willing to help navigate that process? Or even a social worker. Sometimes you have to look outside the family and find a social worker or a case manager that can really help navigate that process for that person.
Sure. It's so critical that the service professionals truly make an impact.
Absolutely.
That one thing is to be delegated a professional, no matter what they specialize in, but that they can truly make a difference and an impact, and they have the tenacity to follow through and basically put their money where their mouth is.
Yes. And it's not an easy process. I mean, it is not an easy process. And it's not an easy process just to navigate the system itself, to understand the difference between, you have to receive Social Security to get developmental, get DDA services. You have to get, you have to have this to have that. You have to have this in place to do this. It's not easy. It's really not easy.
Right. Anyone have any additional questions? Feel free to unmute yourself or type in the chat box, whichever is easiest. And while people are thinking if they have any additional questions, I am going to put up our poll. If people could just respond to the poll for us. I'm curious if we have any parents on here today who might be preparing for this process or going through this process and trying to navigate it during quarantine time.
And that makes it even worse.
Janae, are you just joining us? Cheri, we had a question about how many spots are there for the transition series?
There's 15. We're keeping it a very small class because it's actually myself and another mom, the two of us that are presenting, and we keep the class small because it's a lot of discussion. It gets very in depth, and they have homework, and so we're trying to keep the class small. If we fill it up, we probably will do it again.
All right, I'm going to stop.